Hello, friends. Welcome everyone to this special conversation series with the founder of Internal Family Systems, IFS, Dr. Richard Schwartz. In this episode, it's called All Parts Welcome, and this particular episode is welcoming all of our parts and our children's parts, exploring parenting and IFS. Joining Dick Schwartz is Dr. Becky Kennedy. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Becky, named by Time Magazine the Millennial Parenting Whisperer. She's a clinical psychologist, a mother of three. She's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Good Inside, a guide to becoming the parent you want to be. In reading Good Inside, I saw how she helps parents focus on connection instead of consequences for behavior, and how tremendously powerful this is. She's the CEO, founder of the Good Inside educational platform, helping parents feel sturdier and more equipped to manage the challenges of parenting. Dr. Becky, Dick, welcome.
I just need someone to help me start here we go, start my video. Hi, thank you.
Hi, Tami. Always great to be with you, and you too, Dr. Becky.
You too, Dick. Good to see you.
It's obvious, Dr. Becky, that IFS, for anyone who's familiar with your Good Inside work and the Good Inside community that has gathered around you in your work, that IFS is a really important theoretical model that you incorporate in your work, that informs your work. And here at the beginning, I want to turn it over to Dick, the founder of ISS, to share with us how you can introduce to people who are perhaps new to the model the most important things for they can understand that will help them as parents.
Well, okay.
It's a big question here to start, but you can do it, Dick.
I think so. So the model basically, what I discovered, and this is the 40-year anniversary of that discovery 40 years ago, is that people have what I call parts, but other systems call subpersonalities, and that's a really good thing, that they're all valuable and we're born with them, and if they're not hurt or burdened, what I call burdened, they have all kinds of wonderful qualities to help us in our lives. But they do get burdened by traumas and attachment injuries that force them out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be damaging and particularly can be hurtful to our parents, to our parenting and our kids. And so I was just hearing all that from clients. They were talking about these parts, which I had no clue about what they were talking about in the early days, and just got intrigued. And my background is as a family therapist, so I was trying to make sense of this, not just individual parts, but how they operated as a system, and found that there are some parts that before they got hurt would be these precious inner children who give us lots of joy and playfulness and know how to relate to our kids in a playful, loving way. But once they do get hurt or terrified or shamed, so they feel worthless, they have the power to overwhelm us with those feelings because they get stuck with those feelings. Those are what I call burdens. And they also get frozen in the time of the trauma. So they live as if you're still 5 and you're still in a lot of danger and don't even know how old you are. And so when we have those kinds of parts, these young parts that get hurt or terrified or shamed, we have a natural impulse to lock them away so that we don't have to be pulled back into those scenes or feel any of that anymore. And so they become what I call the exiles in your system. And most all of us come out of childhood with a bunch of exiles. And when you have a bunch of exiles, you feel more delicate. The world seems more dangerous because so many things could trigger them. And if they get triggered, it is like these flames of emotion are going to consume you and pull you down, pull you back into those scenes. So other parts are recruited to become what we call protectors. Some of them are protecting by managing our life so that we don't get triggered. So they might try to manage our appearance so we don't get rejected, manage our performance, so counter the worthlessness, and manage everything around us, including our kids. So a lot of times, if you have a lot of exiles as a parent, you're going to have a lot of managers who are going to try and keep your kids from triggering you all the time. And sometimes that can be quite coercive to your kids because they have a way of triggering us. And but if you do get triggered and these exiles flames burst out, it's scary. It's a big emergency. So there's another set of parts who go into action immediately to try and deal with that emergency, either by attacking the source of the trigger or by dissociating you from the feelings, or some people go get high to get away from it or somehow get distracted. So, and those what we call firefighter parts, they're fighting the fire of these exiles' emotions, also get involved in the parenting and can lash out at the kids in an angry way, in a way that creates more shame inside of them. And so if you are, that's the map to this inner territory. But I also found that as I was working in there and got certain parts to separate, it was like this other person came out who knew how to relate to these parts in a healing way and carried these, what we call the 8C qualities of what we call self-leadership with a capital S. So I might be having somebody work with their critic, and if I could access that place, what I call self, suddenly they wouldn't be angry at the critic, they'd suddenly be curious about it, and they'd be calm and confident relative to it, and even have compassion for it, even though it was screwing up their life or attacking them. And in that state, the critic would relate in a softer way and would start to share its story about how it got forced into that role. And ultimately, what I'm calling the self would take over and actually help that part calm down and heal, actually change, transform. And so that's the big centerpiece of IFS. And so what I love about Dr. Becky's work is she knows about that. She knows that there is this good parent inside of people and knows how to help them access that. And not only does it know how to relate to our parts in a healing way, but it knows how to relate to our kids in a very helpful way, and not just in a compassionate way, but also can be very firm and clear and courageous in setting boundaries with kids. And so there is this good parent inside of us. And so I'm very grateful to you because my two kids who have kids are big fans, and you really influence their parenting. And so anyway, let me leave it there for now.
And Dr. Becky, can you share with us a bit how you use the IFS model and help us in the application, the practicality of what Dick has just laid out?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, to me, one of the basic ideas that I lead with that I think is very in line with, everything Dick talks about with IFS is, we're doing the best we can with the resources we have available. And there's, I always think like there's no symptom in adulthood that wasn't at some point an adaptation, right? And I think the way we look at adults, and look at parents who are yelling or who are rageful or who are not showing up in the way they want to be, it's so judgmental. And I always picture, I don't know, Dick, if I've said this to you, but I always picture like those parts in us being like, you're being critical to me. Like, you're welcome. Like, I've helped you for a long time. Like, have you noticed, and instead, even in the psychological world, we use the word pathology and we blame people for the things that were critical to their survival. I feel like that's like at best a cruel joke, and again, that doesn't mean, I think we conflate things often. That doesn't mean everything's okay. Oh, so at some point it was adaptive, this part of me that now yells at my kid, and so it's okay. Of course it's not okay. It's a matter of, it happened. Are we going to move forward in a way that's productive and actually has a chance of helping us change? Or are we going to look at moments where we're not at our best, and just layer on additional guilt and shame, which only make those moments more likely to happen, right? And you use the word practical. I think being practical and efficient, like, that's just a big part of my personality. And so what I love about so much of IFS is this, like, taking a kind of compassionate curiosity approach toward our tough moments where, let's say I yelled at my kid, right? And this doesn't have to be theoretical. Like, I yell at my kids. It's not like I don't do that just because I'm like Dr. Becky, right? So, and I actually use this example. I started out my TED Talk with this real example in my house. My son said, like, oh, chicken for dinner again, like, disgusting. And, that could be triggering in and of itself, but I had a really rough day, probably a rough week. And I just launched at him, what is wrong with you? And, and if I think about how I look at that after, right? And I can say to myself, I'm such a bad mom. Oh my goodness. If someone knew Dr. Becky yelled at her kids, like, this whole thing is a farce and what's wrong with me? And I know better, right? Versus looking at it from the perspective of some part of me moved from I always think either like moved from passenger seat to driver's seat. Or I often picture like a CEO table and like I'm the CEO. I always call it, I always call it like the sturdy leader. Like, I'm the sturdy leader. And there's a part of me that feels, angry or has needs that aren't seen. And, that part of me is important and deserves a seat at the board table. It has important information for me, the CEO. The problem is that part of me is not my CEO. And in that moment with my son, it kind of took over, right? And then that's where we generally act in a way that's not fully in accordance with like our values. And I think helping more and more parents look at moments that from the perspective of not what is wrong with me, but maybe that was my crescendo moment after probably many, many moments of ignoring my anger or my unmet needs. What would happen if I paid attention to that part before it had to scream out to get my attention? What would that actually look like, right? And usually when those things happen, I know for me or other parents, I'll look at my week and I say, all those like small workouts that I do just to like help my body feel good, I had skipped them. I had asked my partner to come home and help with bedtime and, they didn't. Like, there's a million things that add up to getting me to the place where I no longer have any space for any distress and it screams out. But we can't get to that place of moving from what's wrong with me to what might I need to actually change if we're not curious and that explode out of us in those moments.
Now, Dr. Becky, you use this interesting word that I don't hear people use that much, sturdy. The idea of being sturdy as a parent. And I wonder how that relates to being with ourself as the CEO at the table versus a part taking over and running the show.
I think probably like when the way I think about sturdiness, the way I've defined it, and I've had to do this because I use it so much, people are like, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh, I should like come up with a definition because like, so I've had to recently. I think it's our ability to at once be connected to yourself and connected to someone else. That we're not so fragile that we have to do this to everyone, but we're not so porous that we lose access to who we are. And when I think about Dick's concept of self and all the C's, like I think it's a lot of that compassion, having clarity. To me as a parent, that's one of the most important C's. I think we all think we have hard moments with our kids or in hard stages because of our kids' behavior. I think it's generally because we lack clarity on our role and what's really going on, right? So clarity is a big part of sturdiness. Like sturdiness is our ability to at once to say, I'm aware of what I need and I can respect myself and my boundaries. I can simultaneously be aware of maybe what my child might needs and see what's happening for them. their truth doesn't eviscerate my truth. My truth also doesn't eviscerate their truth. Kind of the ability to like see those two things at once, which of course is very challenging when you're, being yelled at for having a nasty dinner, or, when you're triggered, when you see something in your kid that, was unacceptable in your own childhood, or all the things we have to deal with as a parent.